Yeah, maybe we should get to the top story tonight,
Yeah, let's do
which
it.
is going to be about what's happening generally in the economy, and it's a very very worrying time as we're seeing the Federal Reserve and tacitly the Biden administration taking aim at your wallet. But before we get there, I think people who watch a lot of left wing media, they're familiar with a lot of the indicators about how unequal our society is, how difficult it is for working people to get by. But I wanted to zero in on a specific group of folks just to paint the picture of how shared this misery is for American working people. We're going to talk about mobile homes for a little bit. So, mobile homes are oftentimes derided by folks who don't understand the needs and the opportunities that they oftentimes give people in areas where there's underinvestment in housing, where cities are basically failing to create affordable housing for folks. It's not to make it seem like people don't mistake me and think that the mobile home industry is some benevolent industry, but this kind of like upper middle class, like liberal snide, oh, you live in a trailer park, looking down on folks is not only nasty, but it really just shows a real ignorance as to why these things exist. 20 million people, or about 6% of the United States citizens, live in mobile homes. And as I noted before, oftentimes these parks are developed because there has been a failing from the state, the federal government, and your local government to be able to provide housing for the people who work in your community, the people who make that system run, right? They oftentimes fail to house those folks. And people who are living in mobile homes have always been one publicly derided and then also preyed upon by some of the nastiest folks out there, people who are just trying to make a quick buck on them. And it's getting worse now. So, as you're seeing, rents are rising in cities, housing prices are exploding, basically cutting off an entire generation of people from home ownership. You can only imagine that the demand and the need for more and more people to be housed in mobile homes is going to rise. The scary thing is that in that sector as well, we're seeing a very very significant push and increase in prices. So this is a piece from the Washington Post a few days ago called "We're All Afraid Massive Rent Increases Hit Mobile Homes" by Abba Batarari. And this is a quote from it. Nationally, the average sales prices of manufactured homes has risen nearly 50% during the pandemic, from $82,900 to $123,200, census data shows. Meanwhile, average new home prices rose 22% in that period, according to government figures. And we can put it away. And this is notable, right? Because when we're talking about what's happening to people who are living in that situation, it's worthwhile to remember that there is actually not a lot of metrics that are kept up to date to be able to do the kind of long-term analysis as to what is happening to people's rents who live in mobile homes, right? So we're seeing the prices go up on housing much, much more, as that quote just noted, than what we've even seen in housing, right? I mean, we're talking something near a nearly 50% increase in the cost of a mobile home right now. And as I said, as people have historically relied on this, who are sort of priced out of the housing market, were priced out of the rental market, you're seeing that even that goal of maybe being able to own your own mobile home to live in, to house your family in, is becoming more and more unattainable. So we're seeing this push, right, on just the actual cost of the mobile homes themselves. But you also have to remember, and a lot of people, if you're not familiar, if you don't live in communities where where people are living in trailer parks, you might not be aware of how that system typically works. Now, everything is, there are differences in different communities, but a lot of people hear the word mobile home and they think, okay, well, you live in a park and you can move it. It's not really how it works. So just because of the actual structure of the mobile homes, the longer that you live somewhere, the more likely it is that you actually are unable to move your mobile home, right? Because they sink into the earth, and you maybe put on an addition to give yourself maybe a larger bedroom or bathroom or something like that. So yeah, you own the home, but you don't own the land underneath it. And what that means is, for the people who own those trailer parks, they have a captive market where they can just constantly increase the rents and the prices on them. And as you've seen from your landlord and from all of these other housing industries out there, prices are certainly going up. So while we don't have like the actual studies to be able to tell you the percentage nationwide, anecdotally from the people who do reporting on this, they are all reporting that people are getting significant increases in their rents who are living in mobile home parks. They don't get the same kind of security as a homeowner does. And it certainly is a racket, and it was a racket before the pandemic, and it's only getting worse. And there are some solutions to this, and we'll talk about some ways we could do this on a national level, but it's worth noting, if you could pull this piece up real quick, Matt, that like right here in Austin in 2015, the Austin City Council voted to fund a permanent tenant advocacy group called BASTA. And Greg Casar, who's now running for Congress, was very influential in that move. And through this organization, they basically were able to acquire public funds to be able to buy this mobile home park. So instead of it being something where you have a private company, a private individual on top, basically sucking up your rents, it was something that was community owned, which gave people in that community the security to say, I own this home, this is my home, and nobody's going to be able to take it away from me by pricing me out of the community, right? This is something that is good. This is a transition from private to public that we should certainly be supporting. And we'll come back to trailer parks and mobile homes in just a minute. But I just wanted to note that because I think for a lot of people, that might be an image to help them understand just how dire things are getting. Right on top of the Fox News segments and the MSNBC segments about how nobody wants to work anymore, you're seeing the squeeze on working people across the board in this country. And we're going to talk about inflation in a second, but one of the most notable inflation that we have been seeing in our lifetime is not the paltry wages that workers get. It's the amount of rents that landlords can extract from you. It's the amount of increase in home prices that we've seen. It's also the increase in mobile homes. So Ben,
yeah, can I just jump in right there? Like
do.
even like the like student loan inflation, for instance, you can't take that away from real estate inflation, because as somebody who got big student loans to move to this place I am now, a lot of that was going towards rent, right? Like, and anyway, continue.
No, this is a crucial point, and it really does matter on the policy level, because this is what they're going to do. So Ben Norton of Multipolarista wrote a piece that was also reprinted in the monthly review called U.S. Federal Reserve says its goal is to get wages down. And he went through Jerome Powell, the Fed chair's statements from early May, and broke down what he is saying that the Federal Reserve, right, effectively our central bank in this country, right, it's not a one-to-one, but effectively our central bank in this country, what their plan is to do about inflation. And if you could put up this first slide here, Matt. This is Fed Chair Jerome Powell. There's a path by which we would be able to have demand moderate in the labor market and therefore have vacancies come down without unemployment going up. Because vacancies are at such an extraordinarily high level, there are 1.9 vacancies for every unemployed person, 11.5 million vacancies to 6 million unemployed people. Now, I just want to remind folks, we did this on the show. I'll put it in the show notes later. But we did an entire show on what Marx calls the industrial reserve army of labor, right? Which is one of the nastiest aspects of capitalism, is that capitalism tries to make working people compete against each other. They try to make you compete against your coworker by having you accept a lower wage, which then collectively lowers the wage floor, and allows capitalists to get away with making more profit at the expense of the value that is going to workers in the form of wages, right? And I wanted to note that just because that first bit, he might not use the same kind of terminology, Powell, but he's thinking in that kind of terminology, right? It's very, very bad that there are more vacancies than people who are applying for jobs, because that means that businesses have to compete for workers versus workers having to compete against each other to get a job. We talked yesterday on the Griscom stream about what's going on in the trucking community, where, again, there's the same kind of nobody wants to work anymore. These young people are lazy and they don't want to do this kind of industry. They don't want to work in this kind of industry. Turns out studies have shown that no, it's not that people don't want to work. And I said this last night, but you know, I've been a part of working class America my entire life. I know a lot of people. You can say a lot of things about working Americans, but you cannot call them lazy. Boy, you cannot do that. What's happening in the trucking industry is like what's happening in a lot of other industries is people were saying, you know what, I'm not going to take a job that makes me work 60 hours a week and doesn't pay me overtime when I can stay in my community and find a job that pays me overtime. It's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what I was doing before. That's why there's a trucker shortage right now. It's functionally a wage shortage. So that's the kind of shit that we're seeing from the Federal Reserve when they're thinking about this reserve army of labor. And if you could put up this second bit here, Matt, because this puts it very, very clearly. And this is economist speak, and I'll try to explain it a little bit to y'all what he's saying. By moderating demand, we could see vacancies come down, right? And as a result, and they could come down fairly significantly, and I think put supply and demand at least closer together than they are. And that would give us a chance to have lower, to get inflation, to get wages down. I'm going to say that again, to get wages down and then get inflation down without having to slow the economy and have a recession and have unemployment rise materially. So there's a path to that. So that's what we're getting right now from the Federal Reserves, the Federal Reserve, the people who are sitting at the height of the economy, making decisions that have significant trickle-down effect on the shop that you work at, the grocery store that you shop at, the car dealership that you buy a vehicle from, right? This is the kind of thing that they're thinking about. Let's get wages down, and then maybe inflation will fall along with it, right? They are very, very worried about this situation where workers are not as desperate as they were 2 to 3 years ago. And maybe I'll just let me debunk one thing real quick for y'all. Wages are not what is driving inflation. If you could put up the last slide, Matt. This is from the EPI, the Economic Policy Institute. It was a blog post they put out a few days ago. There's a whole study attached to it. Wage growth has been dampening inflation all along. Wait a second. I thought wages were what was causing inflation. Nominal wage growth has been fast over the past year relative to the past few decades. And just as a side note, remember that what has been happening over the past few decades has effectively been wage cuts for workers because inflation has outpaced any kind of wage growth that we've seen. So yes, we saw a slight uptick in wages over the past few years, but relative to inflation, it's a nothing burger. It has lagged far behind inflation, meaning that labor costs are dampening, not amplifying price pressures. Now, what does that mean? What they're saying there is that since wages have been rising a little bit, it has been making the inflation crisis that is experienced by workers a little bit less harsh, right? So if like your wage was a straight $10 now and $20 worth of $20 worth of goods 4 years ago is now effectively $25, $26 for you, you would have seen a significant loss in your purchasing power because of inflation. And what they're saying here is like, okay, well, this, your wage might have gone up to $12 an hour. So you're making a little bit more, but it's not enough to make up for the loss in inflation over the past few years. So you're a little bit better off as a purchaser, but certainly are not where you should be, and also are not the cause of inflation. The cause of inflation has been corporate profit, corporate greed, and inequality. Look at I've made this point time and time again on the program, but just look at what the oil and gas industry is doing right now. Drop climate change for a second. Just notice prices are extremely high on gasoline, something that everybody needs to get around in the society. And the oil companies, they're not investing in production. They are taking the spoils from the high prices of oil and gas, and they are giving them to their shareholders, right? That's the kind of stuff that drives up inflation, especially in a society as unequal as the United States, where the ability to save money, to have money that you just sort of sock away and you're not using on your basic expenses on a daily, weekly basis is an extreme privilege. And all of those people being able to hoard more and more wealth over the past few years, as you have seen corporate profits grow, as you have seen the ability to make a lot of money on speculation grow, that drives inflation much more than somebody seeing a paltry hourly wage increase. And what we're seeing is actually, thank God that we've seen wages increase ever so slightly over the past couple of years, because the inflation crisis, which is already bad, would have been so much worse today if it hadn't been that case. So, yeah, you're muted, Matt.
I'll let you continue, and then I got a thought experiment about what these people represent. These technocrats that
Well,
just
why don't
are
you do that
trying
first?
to.
Because we're going to go to Biden.
So yeah, I mean, we think about like the way that we're taught American history and the mythologized way of like the House of Burgesses, and it's the Enlightenment, and we get together to deliberate ideas, and that's what leads to the Senate and the greatest deliberative body on earth, and stuff like that. But what the House of Burgesses was a way for a bunch of slave owners to come together and collectively figure out how to manage their slaves, and also like come together and sort of demand stuff of the royal governors council. But anyway, so like this is these guys coming out and saying, look, we've crunched the numbers and workers just got to take less. Is like basically if Thomas Jefferson and George Washington came down from Monticello and Mount Vernon and were like, look, guys, slaves, I'm saying, gonna be less food for you, gonna be a lot less. And this is just how it has to be in order. Meanwhile, look at the fucking mansions they come out of. Like, look at all this stuff. Look at all the amount of money that was shoveled to corporations. Fork it up. That's the question. Is like if someone's got to pay here, it's the profiteers, right? And when have they ever in our fucking lifetimes been made to be the ones to sacrifice? And like the worst that if this gets bad, if the economy really and they start to put the screws to people, that's what you need to tell them. Is when the last time you saw Jeff Bezos or any one of these motherfuckers sacrifice anything despite everything going on in the world? It's just up and up. The line goes up for those guys. They're fucking to the moon, literally. And meanwhile, what you can't get a raise? You can't get or you get a raise that's a fraction of the cent. Meanwhile, like food goes up like multiples. Ridiculous.
Or you got to raise a hard fought raise after years of getting it and then see it erased by inflation, right?
Yeah.
Which is going to be the experience for many, many workers if people like Powell get their way. So we just broke down these. This isn't even just me speculating at this point. I hope that people trust me on things at this point. But this one's very clear. Powell says, goal of Federal Reserve, get wages down. We need to get the wages down. That's the big problem.
If
right?
Trump said that, the Occupy Democrats would be like, "Oh my God, Rich Reed, if you think Donald Trump is a psychopath for saying this."
Well, let's pull up the solution to Trump here, Matt. Joe Biden. This is what Joe Biden's response was. This is a couple days ago, and he said other things to this effect recently. I will say, I don't have a lot of expectations for Biden, but when I was finding this the other day for the segment, my jaw was really on the floor. Because this is just the height of irresponsibility. This is Joe Biden. My plan to tackle inflation is simple. Let the Fed do its job. Lower everyday costs for Americans. Doesn't mean anything what he's saying right there. Keep reducing the deficit.
Fucking Walmart? Like,
yeah, exactly. He should be. Like, take over. Yeah, right. And keep reducing the deficit. By taking these steps and with Congress taking action, we can build a sustained recovery that benefits all Americans. And let's just start with the easy one here, which is Biden had a program. A program was put into place that had a massive impact in millions of Americans' lives. You know, we talk about what Lula did for hunger in Brazil. What the child tax credit did for millions of American families was nothing short of exceptional. It changed people's lives. It allowed people who are struggling to be able to afford food for their children, be able to find clothing for them. Remember, you know, all these times people talk about how rich America is, you know, and I think sometimes, you know, people get a little bit worked up with that and don't pay attention to the fact that, you know, something like 20% of Americans have a difficult time putting food on the table, let alone healthy food, anything like that, just basic sustenance to maintain their life on the table. There's extreme poverty in this country. And the child tax credit was not perfect. It should have been much more generous and should have been permanent. But it was effective. This just last week, nearly half of families with kids can no longer afford enough food 5 months after the child tax credit ended. I'll read that again. Nearly half of families with kids can no longer afford enough food for 5 months after enough food 5 months after child tax credit ended. This isn't the wealthiest country of the world, and this is the game that they're playing with the next generation of children, right? So talking about Biden right here, what he's saying, what he wants to do for the everyday average American there. The first thing that should be done is should be the expansion of the child tax credit. But I want to go beyond that. Because this first bit, what Biden says, where he says, let the Federal Reserve do its job, is one of those things that gets the liberals so excited. They get pink in the cheeks when they hear stuff like this. It's the same thing as the cult of the Supreme Court. They love having institutions that are anti-democratic and are run by technocrats. Now, sometimes I think they get flawed, but they love the independence and the separation of these institutions from the public, right? That is one of the most dangerous things. You live in a democracy here. And you have this extremely powerful body that, by the way, during the pandemic, pumped trillions into the pockets of the wealthiest people in this country. Something that's not talked about enough, right? From things like PPP to just buying up corporate debt, right? There's this big crisis. Oh my God, what are we going to do about student loan debt? Oh, is it fair for some students to have their debt? Blah, blah, blah. Where were they when the Federal Reserve was buying up bullshit debt from corporations to keep the economy afloat in COVID-19? Right? Where was the question about that? Where was the democratic debate? You see, there's a very, very different political game that the rich get to play. The monetary system, off limits, right? The actions of the Federal Reserve, off limits to politics. We can have debates that won't go anywhere about student loans. We can have debates that maybe won't go anywhere about minimum wage stuff, right? But you see where they're like, no, we won't touch this. And it's absolutely cowardly. And there's no reason for an institution that has as much power and effect on our lives to be separate from us. Because again, just putting on my obnoxious centrist, cap for a second. Well, if you have a political Federal Reserve, then they're just going to do policies that might make the economy very, very weak, because they're just pumping money to everybody so that they get votes, right? And that's the argument that you get against against having a publicly controlled Federal Reserve, is that if you don't let the experts do their jobs, these things will be controlled by politics. In the same way that we say this about the Supreme Court, look at the actual history of what the Federal Reserve has done. Time and time again, in crisis moments, they pump money to the wealthy and they punish the poor. Happened with the Volcker shock in the 70s, one of the most defining moments of not just American history, by the way, but also global financial history, because when Volcker rose interest rates like that, poor countries in the South saw their debt payments skyrocket, and many of them had to default, right? And that meant accepting IMF loans and more American involvement in the way that they run their society. Right? You saw the same thing after the dot-com bubble, and you certainly saw it after the financial crisis here. The Federal Reserve's pipes go one way. They go into the pocketbooks of the rich and powerful of this society, right? So why do you think, what world do you live in? I'm sorry, friend, at this point, where you think an absence of democracy from these kind of institutions is somehow going to help them run for everyday people, better for everyday people? You have your head in the sand. An absence of democracy only benefits one group, the powerful. And Biden's cowardice on this is absolutely despicable. And the reason that he's making such a big show grandstanding about this is because Trump mentioned one time that he just wanted to put pressure on the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates low, right? Just put pressure. I think you should actually go a hell of a lot further on these things. But Biden's unwilling to even push and say, you know what, this is unhelpful. This is very dangerous. Biden will get steamrolled by these people, and they will punish American workers, and the effects will be felt for generations.
Yeah, I mean, along with like the parliamentarian, it's another sort of invented obstacle that we just have to consult the Oracle. And the Oracle says, no, again, damn it. This fucking Oracle is like 99-0 on deciding for moneyed interests. It's really...
Yeah. Well, maybe next time I'll look out for us.
Yeah.
And we should definitely do a lot more on the Fed. I think there's a lot of confusion as to how it functions, what powers it has for people. We talked about this a little bit actually with Brett Scott. There's a big reason that Bitcoin and libertarians are very effective. It's funny, like, libertarians always say end the Fed, end the Fed. I actually very much disagree with that. It's very important to have an institution like that can put liquidity into the system in a moment of crisis. That is an important social function. The Federal Reserve does do that, but the important thing is where that liquidity goes, and it goes to benefit a small group of people. So libertarians who are like, oh, we hate the Fed, that's BS. A central bank is a helpful thing in a society. The problem is not its existence. right? But it's separation from the public sphere. And it was when we were talking with Brett Scott, like a lot of times people, because of the confusion about the Federal Reserve, become very attracted to these kind of, weirdo, right-wing, libertarian philosophies because there's a lot of confusion on that. Anyway, long-winded thing to say, we should do more on the Federal Reserve in the future. But I just wanted to do a quick callback to what we opened with, talk about mobile homes in this country. The housing crisis is a crisis of, one, the federal government's failure to do housing policy, but also the inability and also sometimes purposeful failure of localities and state governments for being able to do something about this. The Federal Reserve tomorrow could set up an institution that basically lend out money at very, very low interest rates, or maybe even a negative interest rate if you really want to spur things up, to communities who are living in mobile home parks, to buy those from the private owners and to make those into publicly owned, cooperatively owned parks, to be able to push back on the squeeze that all those people are facing, give those people the security, and to give more and more people the right to housing in this country. And you could expand that model to apartments, to houses, to a lot of other things too. But there's a lot that we could do with a democratically run central bank or Federal Reserve that we're not doing. And Bieden, I'd never had high hopes from people who might not be familiar with my work. Don't get me wrong here. But Bieden truly is not only missing the moment, but he's actually lying down when really nefarious forces are coming for the wallets of everyday working people in this country.
Yeah.
Well, we got more to come. In a second, we're going to be joined by Kurt Hackbarth and talk about another one of Bieden's failures, this time on the international scale. And then reminding folks who just joined us all summer long, not all summer long, all June long, we're doing our summer streams. We're making the post games public. Those will be over at twitch.tv/leftreckoning. Join us immediately after the show ends, probably going to be around 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern, for our live stream with Ben Burgess. We'll be taking questions from the chat. We'll be taking voicemails. Ben and I are going to be doing a quick debate on Bernie 2024. We're doing a visit from the Hamburglar, Steven Crowder. I'm trying to remember the other folks. We got a hell of a lot coming for y'all in the post game too. So that's public on twitch.tv/leftreckoning. But always, if you want to support the show, join us at patreon.com/leftreckoning.